We got a new ruling that affects the Epstein cover-up by Donald Trump. Particularly, we've got a federal judge in Fort Lauderdale, Judge Rodney Smith, who has decided that the Epstein Transparency Act, the new law signed into law by Donald Trump, requiring that all Epstein files redacted to protect victims and the innocent be released to the American people, overrides a rule of criminal procedure that normally blocks and keeps confidential and secret grand jury material. The grand jury that had been looking into Jeffrey Epstein in particular, and had originally that particular set of materials, the grand jury process, the grand jury proceedings, any evidence presented to the grand jury, any of that, the Department of Justice is seeking in order to have released. It had initially been blocked back in July by Judge Rosenberg before the new federal law was passed by Congress and signed by Trump. But now that there's this new Epstein bill now in law, a federal judge has ordered that anything related to Epstein that was in the Southern District of Florida, where the initial prosecution took place, right? That led to, for instance, him being, Epstein being given a sweetheart plea bargain deal to serve a limited time in jail in return for pleading guilty to state sex trafficking or child prostitution law violations. That entire proceeding now, we should be able to get our hands on based on Rodney Smith, Judge Rodney Smith's new ruling. Let me read to you or kind of get you caught up, and then I'll read to you from the actual order that just came out by way of Rodney Smith. Back in July, around July 18th, the Department of Justice, because they didn't want to release the documents that they had, ran out to various federal courts and they filed motions to have grand jury proceedings, which are very limited proceedings, very limited evidence, very limited testimony, but that they be open to the American public. They ran to a couple of judges, Judge Berman and Judge Engelmeyer up in New York. Judge Engelmeyer presiding over the Ghislaine Maxwell prosecution issues, Judge Berman overseeing the Epstein prosecution that took place in New York. He hanged himself before the trial. There was also this other original proceeding down in Florida, in West Palm Beach, conducted down there that led eventually to a non-prosecution agreement being entered into between Alex Acosta, the then U.S. attorney, and Jeffrey Epstein. He served very little time in jail and kept doing his child sex trafficking predator activity. That Alex Acosta eventually became the labor secretary for Donald Trump, if you're putting all the dots together here, connecting all the dots. So these three motions get filed. Judge Engelmeyer and Judge Berman said they're not going to be releasing the grand jury materials. This is all before the new bill was passed by Congress, because it violated Rule 6 of the Federal Rules of Criminal Procedure about the sanctity of the grand jury process. Judge Rosenberg, Robin Rosenberg, sitting in West Palm Beach, did the exact same thing. That ended July. Now we fast forward in the last couple of weeks. As we all know, the bill gets passed unanimously except for one vote in the House and the Senate. Trump is forced to sign it. And now we're supposed to get the records in the next 20 days or so from the executive branch. At the same time, the Trump administration is going back to these judges, including the judges in the Southern District of Florida, to get the grand jury material also produced to the public. Enter Rodney Smith. Robin Rosenberg, the original judge, when they closed the case, when she ruled and closed the matter in July, that got that case closed. It then got reassigned, as it often does, to a randomly selected judge. It went down to Rodney Smith, who sits in Fort Lauderdale, which is about 45 minutes south of West Palm Beach, and the other federal court in the Southern District of Florida. He got his hands on this emergency motion, and here's what he's ruled. Let me read it to you. Order granting the motion to unseal the grand jury transcripts based on the Epstein Files Transparency Act becoming law. It says the government moves pursuant to the recently enacted Epstein Files Transparency Act to have the protective orders lifted and to unseal the grand jury materials related to the investigation that happened in 2005 and 2007 against Jeffrey Epstein and presumably Ghislaine Maxwell. The act requires that the Attorney General, Judge Smith says, to make publicly available all unclassified records, documents, communications, and investigative materials in the possession of the Department of Justice. The government previously sought to unseal the grand jury transcripts. That request was denied because it violated Federal Rule of Criminal Procedure 6, and the government failed to show the disclosure was appropriate. In the instant motion, the government argues that the newly enacted act, the new law, overrides Rule 6E, overrides the prohibition in Rule 6E. Primarily, there's case law that says that if there's a more recent statute that governs the same information, that the more recent statute will govern over the older one. The act applies to unclassified records, documents, and communications that relate to Epstein and Ghislaine Maxwell. Consequently, the later enacted specific language of the act trumps, no pun intended, Rule 6's prohibition on disclosure, and therefore he has ordered it be granted and has ordered that the grand jury transcripts be unsealed. Now, let me step back for a minute. I'm not sure Judge Smith, and I know Judge Rodney Smith, great judge, Miami State Court judge before he got elevated to the feds. I'm not sure he's right about this. The act says in the hands of the Justice Department or the executive branch. Grand jury materials is not in the hands of the Justice Department or the executive branch. It's in the hands of the judicial branch under the federal rules of criminal procedure and their secrecy. I don't see the act, unless it had specific language that said we are having a limited exception to Rule 6E of the criminal rules about grand jury secrecy, and we also mean this to apply to grand jury secrecy or grand jury materials, then I would agree with Judge Smith. But be that as it may, he has adopted this decision. He has ruled on it, which means we as the public and the survivors are now going to get their hands on the grand jury transcript. Now, let me manage expectations. There was a presentation to the grand jury. There was an indictment of Epstein. There may be mention of Ghislaine Maxwell. There weren't a lot of witnesses that were involved in that particular case. There were some FBI agents and others. There, as far as I know, there was maybe 1 or 0 victims or survivors that testified, and there wasn't a lot of material put in front of the grand jury. But whatever it is, we'll get our hands on it. We'll be able to dissect it and talk about it here on Legal AF with you, and we'll bring it to you. Now that this order is in place, we'll talk about what happens next. Has had a couple of developments in the last couple of days in the matter. I mean, Ghislaine Maxwell's lawyer looks like he's fired Ghislaine Maxwell or vice versa, and she's going to be going it alone and filing some sort of motion for writ of habeas corpus to get out of Texas jail. But that just happened in the last couple of days, including the disclosure she's going to do it alone, or as we say, pro se, without a lawyer. So lots of moving parts here on the Epstein cover-up and of the cover-up of the cover-up. You're going to want to be here with us. Hit the free subscribe button and help us continue to grow this pro-democracy channel. Until my next report, I'm Michael Popok.
I'm Michael Popok, and I got some big news for our audience. Most of you know me as the co-founder of Midas Touches Legal AF and the Legal AF YouTube channel, or as a 35-year national trial lawyer. Now, building on what we started together on Legal AF, I've launched a new law firm, the Popok Firm, dedicated to obtaining justice through compassionate and zealous legal representation. At the Popok Firm, we are focused on obtaining justice for those who have been injured or damaged by a life-altering event, by securing the highest dollar recoveries. I've been tirelessly fighting for justice for the last 35 years, so my own law firm organically building on my Legal AF work just feels right. And I've handpicked a team of top-tier trial fighters and settlement experts throughout all 50 states known as big auto injury attorneys who have the know-how to beat heartless insurance companies, corporations, government entities, and their attorneys. Big Auto's attorneys working with my firm are rock stars in their respective states, and collectively responsible for billions of dollars in recoveries. So if you or a loved one have been on the wrong side of a catastrophic auto, motor vehicle, rideshare, or truck accident, suffered a personal injury, or been the victim of medical malpractice, employment harassment or discrimination, or suffered a violation of your civil and constitutional rights, then contact the Popok Firm today at 1-877-POPOK-AF or by visiting my website at www.thepopokfirm.com and fill out a free case evaluation form. And if we determine that you have a case and you sign with us, we don't get paid unless you do. The Popok Firm, fighting for your justice every step of the way.